Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another session of your World Civilizations class. And today we'll be speaking about the age of European Enlightenment. Here are the major topics that we expect to cover: the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment and religion, then the Enlightenment and society, and the enlightened absolutism will be covered in a following session, not today. Here are some questions that we'd like to bring to your attention for your consideration as we move forward. By way of introduction, let us just begin by saying that the scientific revolution, the first topic mentioned, was a very important event that transformed every part of the world, and it impacted. The major part of its impact was in the realm of science and also in everyday life. The questions I mentioned earlier are these, as you can see here. How did the Enlightenment values as well as Enlightenment admiration of science become one of the chief defining qualities of societies regarded as advanced and progressive and modern? I will not spend a lot of time on these questions. I will just go through them very quickly. I'll pause for you to read them and then we will proceed. Here we're speaking about the modes of thought that developed during the Enlightenment. Okay, let us move on to speak about the scientific revolution. The scientific revolution, which took place in the 16th and 17th centuries, witnessed one of history's most significant intellectual developments. It was a sweeping change in man's view of the universe. The proud idea of the earth being the center of the universe gave way to a new idea, which was the earth was only one of many planets orbiting around the sun, and itself, the sun, was one of millions of stars. This was really a very novel idea in terms of science. The scientific revolution was limited to a small group of people, actually to a few hundred people. And because of their scientific view of mankind's place in the larger scheme of things, life was transformed. People began to rethink moral and religious matters as well. And the new scientific methods and concepts were deemed so impressive that ever since science became the measuring stick of knowledge in the Western world. There were achievements in many areas, but especially in the field of astronomy. This captured people's attention. What was known as the Ptolemaic system as the standard combination changed. When we speak about the Ptolemaic system, that goes back to Ptolemy in the year 150 CE with the physical cosmology of Aristotle. The Ptolemaic system, of course, was based on geocentrism. Geocentrism meaning the earth was considered as the center of the universe and everything else revolved, all the other planets and heavenly bodies revolved around the earth. Of course, this idea was challenged by Nicholas Copernicus, who was a Polish astronomer. And he was actually the first figure in this movement of the scientific revolution to challenge the idea of geocentrism in the early 16th century. So Copernicus was dissatisfied with the traditional Ptolemaic astronomical system, and the idea that the Earth moved around in a circular manner was also challenged. The Ptolemaic thinkers had to make many clumsy adjustments in their system for the sake of mathematical elegance, but Copernicus preferred to place the sun in the center of the universe. He was the first one in the European context to understand that the sun was at the center of the universe and not the earth. Um, Here, of course, he had many detractors. Not everyone agreed with him. Another interesting character in the scientific revolution was the Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe, and he was along the same lines of thought as Copernicus. Another one was Johannes Kepler, a German astronomer, and he proposed that the orbits of the universe were not entirely circular, but instead it was elliptical. Here's some more information about Johannes Kepler. But by far one of the most interesting characters of the scientific revolution was Galileo Galilei, because he turned his telescope to the skies and made many discoveries that lasted for a long time. Galileo, by the way, was a contemporary of Kepler, and he was very much opposed by the church. He proposed that the universe was subject to mathematical laws, and of course this belief was against the teachings of the church. This brought Galileo a lot of problems, and in fact he was condemned. That took place in 1633. He was forced to recant his idea that he was forced to recant his ideas, but that was only done publicly. Um, it remained in his heart that he felt that the sun was the center of the universe. Here is a picture of Galileo. Um, it was done by a Flemish author. Now, here is also some information about the writings of Galileo, the dialogues of the two chief systems. Now, there are other figures who were very famous in the scientific revolution, and we'll just go through these very quickly. Francis Bacon, for example, from 1561 to 1626, Isaac Newton, and also there were some very famous women in the scientific revolution, and it changed the status of women because they had very few opportunities. Here are some names of famous women. Margaret Cavendish, who wrote about the observations upon experimental philosophy, pardon me. And another important character was John Locke. He hoped to achieve for philosophy a lawful picture of mankind, and he was one of the most profound philosophers of his time. He was very much concerned with understanding human nature, and he rejected the idea of original sin, which, by the way, it's something that we should have discussed earlier when we spoke about the Reformation. So in class, please remind me to bring this back to your attention. And here is a picture of John Locke. He was, as we said, a very influential character in the scientific revolution. More information about John Locke, and here is a brief overview of major figures of the scientific revolution. Please feel free to pause to read through this carefully if you'd like to do so. Now let us turn our attention to the Enlightenment proper. What do we mean by the Enlightenment? It's a movement of the 18th century stating that change and reform were desirable through the application of reason and science. As you can see here, the idea was to move away from focusing entirely on religion, but focus was on the application of reason and science. From the perspective of Europe's future, perhaps the most important development of the 18th century was this movement called the Enlightenment. And enlightened thinkers were also called philosophers, and they believed that change and reform were both possible and in fact very desirable. Before the 17th century, a belief in innovation or change through rational criticism had long belonged only to some pioneering thinkers, but with the Enlightenment it became a characteristic of the Western society. Let us move along to speak about now movements about the philosophers. What did they do? They popularized in the 17th century rationalism and scientific ideas. In other words, they made the idea of science accessible to the masses, the people in general. They also spoke against political oppression and religious condemnation. By the mid-century, they had brought enlightened ideas to the European public in many different ways. Let us look at some of the most important figures in this Enlightenment. One was Voltaire. His name was actually François-Marie Arouet, but also known as Voltaire. He was one of the most influential philosophers, and he was very much in favor of, and he admired the English. Here is a picture of Voltaire. As you can see, he was also a dramatist and a poet and a historian, and he popularized many ideas. He spoke, as you can see, we said he was also interested in science. He popularized Newton's ideas, and Candide was one of his most famous writings. Another figure was Diderot, and he was responsible for the publication of the first of an encyclopedia, and this vast encyclopedia in the mid-century enlightened people throughout Europe. It was a very ambitious enterprise, and the collective effort of over 100 authors. And this project aimed at secularizing learning and replacing the intellectual assumptions of the Middle Ages and the Reformation. Here is a picture of Diderot and some more information about it. We're going to pause here, and I'm afraid we'll have to continue in a second section here because we are running out of time. In the next section we will speak about the Enlightenment and religion. That will be a rather short section. Thank you for listening, and please continue. This will be continued. Thank you.